There's something different about people who don't want to be rich. Maybe it's the way they can watch their college friends buy bigger houses and nicer cars without feeling like they're falling behind. Maybe it's how they can walk past luxury stores without that nagging sense of inadequacy. Or maybe it's that peculiar combination of contentment and ambition that seems impossible to people still climbing the wealth ladder, wanting to do meaningful work while having zero interest in maximizing their income. Because somewhere along the way, these people figured out something that most of society spends their entire lives missing. This mindset didn't emerge from laziness or fear of success. It was forged through specific experiences that rewired how they see money, status, and what actually constitutes a life well lived. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why some people opted out of the wealth race entirely. Not because they couldn't compete, but because they realized the prize wasn't worth the cost. Let's start with something that changed everything. Picture yourself at 9 years old, sitting at the dinner table on a Tuesday night. Your father's chair is empty again. He's at the office, chasing a promotion that's been dangling in front of him for 2 years. Your mother says he'll be home by 8. He comes home at 10:30. You're already in bed, but you hear the garage door. You hear him warming up leftovers in the microwave. The next morning, he's gone before you wake up. This isn't an emergency. This is every week, sometimes every day. He misses your soccer games. He misses family dinners. He misses Saturday mornings. And when he finally gets that promotion 6 months later, guess what changes? Nothing. The hours get longer. The stress gets worse. The money gets better. But you're 12 now, and you barely know the man who lives in your house. You watch him age 5 years and 18 months. What you're witnessing is what researchers call the hedonic treadmill at the family level. Your father believed the next level would bring relief. But beyond about $75,000 annually, increases in income produce diminishing returns on happiness. Your father wasn't working toward enough. He was working toward more. And more never arrives because the goalpost keeps moving. This created adults who recognize the pattern from the inside. When their own careers offer them the chance to trade time for money, they do the math differently. They remember that empty chair at dinner. They remember watching someone sacrifice the present for a future that never became present. They're not afraid of success. They're afraid of becoming their father. So when someone asks why they're not more ambitious, what they're really asking is why they're not willing to trade their life for money. And these people finally know the answer. But it wasn't just witnessing sacrifice that shaped this psychology. Sometimes the lesson came from experiencing the opposite. Now imagine a specific summer afternoon when you were 14. You're with your friends at someone's house after school. Not the rich kid's house, just a regular house. Someone's mom made sandwiches. There's a basketball hoop in the driveway. The garage has bikes you can borrow. You spend 6 hours doing absolutely nothing productive. Playing pickup basketball. Sitting on the curb talking. Riding bikes to the convenience store to buy candy with the $3 in your pocket. And here's what strikes you. Maybe not that day, but later when you remember it. You were completely satisfied. Nothing about that day required money beyond the absolute basics. The house wasn't fancy. The food wasn't expensive. The entertainment cost nothing. But the afternoon was perfect. You had enough space, enough food, enough friends, enough freedom. That feeling of sufficiency, you can still recall it. The absence of wanting, the presence of having exactly what you needed in that moment. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation in reverse. Most people adapt upward, they experience luxury and reset their baseline higher. But you experience something else, the recognition that satisfaction doesn't scale with resources. Research on flow states confirms this. The most satisfying moments in human life rarely involve material abundance. They involve presence, connection, and engagement with what's in front of you. That afternoon taught you something wealthy people often spend millions trying to recapture. The feeling of enough. not scarcity, not deprivation, enough. These people carry this knowledge into adulthood. When consumer culture says their car isn't nice enough, their house isn't big enough, their vacation wasn't exotic enough, they have this memory. They remember perfect days that cost nothing. They're not impressed by expensive restaurants because they remember the best meals being at someone's kitchen table. They're not motivated by luxury travel because they remember the best adventures happening within bike riding distance. They're immune to a specific type of marketing because they've experienced the thing marketing promises, satisfaction, and they know it doesn't come from acquisition. But sometimes the lesson wasn't about having enough. Sometimes it was about watching what happens when someone gets everything they thought they wanted. Consider someone in your extended family, an uncle maybe, a family friend. He's the successful one, the one your parents mention when they talk about making it. He's got the big house in the expensive neighborhood, multiple cars, belongs to the country club, takes elaborate vacations. At family gatherings, he talks about investments, property values, his business deals. Your parents listen with a mix of admiration and envy. But you notice something else. You notice he's on his third marriage. You notice his kids barely speak to him. You notice he can't sit still at family dinners, always checking his phone, always distracted, always somewhere else mentally. You notice the expensive watch on his wrist and the exhaustion in his eyes. You notice he drinks too much. You notice he brags about things, but never talks about things that matter. And one Christmas, you overhear him telling your father he's on blood pressure medication, sleeping pills, and seeing a therapist for anxiety. What you're observing is what researchers call the grand illusion. Studies spanning 75 years on happiness found that wealth and career success had almost no correlation with life satisfaction. The factors that did correlate: quality of relationships, sense of purpose, and community connection. Exactly what your uncle sacrificed for financial success. You're learning through observation what researchers teach through data. Wealth can solve problems, but it also creates new ones. And the specific problems it creates, isolation, distrust, misaligned priorities, are often harder to solve than the problems it eliminates. This creates adults who don't believe the promise. When society says wealth equals happiness, they have empirical evidence otherwise. They saw it. They watched someone with everything money can buy struggle with things money can't fix. So when they're making career decisions, they factor in variables others ignore. Does this job give me time with my family? Does this success require sacrificing relationships? They're not being naive about money. They're being realistic about what money can't buy. And they've seen that the people who have it often wish they'd made different choices. Sometimes the lesson was even more dramatic, watching wealth transform someone you knew. Let's talk about someone you grew up with, a friend from middle school. His family was like yours, middle class, normal. You'd hang out at his house. His parents were friendly. Everything was regular. Then, something changed. His dad's company went public, or sold, or got acquired. The details didn't matter to you then. But suddenly everything shifted. They moved to a different neighborhood. A much different neighborhood. New house, probably 5 times bigger than their old one. You tried to stay friends. You'd go to the new house, but it felt different. He felt different. He started talking about brands you'd never heard of. Started making comments about people's cars, people's clothes, where people went on vacation. The friends he made in the new neighborhood had different values. Within a year, you barely recognized him. Within 2 years, you weren't really friends anymore. Not because of a fight, because he'd become someone else, someone you didn't particularly like. You were witnessing what sociologists call status anxiety spillover. Research shows that relative wealth, how much you have compared to your reference group, affects behavior more than absolute wealth. Your friend didn't just get money. He got relocated to a new hierarchy where he had to prove his belonging. The insecurity that created changed him. You learned something crucial. Wealth doesn't just change circumstances, it changes people, and not always for the better. It introduced competition where there was once connection, comparison where there was once contentment. This created adults who are cautious about social mobility that requires leaving their values behind. They've seen people trade authenticity for status. They've watched money create distance between people who used to be close. So when they're offered opportunities that would require relocating to wealthier circles, they hesitate. Not from insecurity, from experience. They know that every social group has norms, and wealthy circles often have norms they don't want to adopt. They'd rather stay genuine in their current community than perform wealth in a new one. They've already seen that movie. But the education didn't stop with personal observations. Eventually, technology gave everyone front row seats to the performance of wealth. Fast forward to when social media became ubiquitous. You're in your 20s, maybe early 30s. You're scrolling through Instagram. Every feed is curated luxury. Vacation photos from Bali, brunch at expensive restaurants, designer bags carefully positioned in the frame, luxury cars, perfect homes with perfect lighting. And somewhere around photo number 50, something clicks. You realize everyone is performing. Everyone is staging their life for an audience. Everyone is signaling status. You think about the effort involved, the planning, the photography, the caption writing, the maintenance of the image. You think about people you know personally, people whose online presence suggests endless luxury, but whose actual lives you know are stressful, debt-laden, or empty. You realize the entire platform is a theater where everyone's performing wealth, whether they have it or not. And suddenly, the whole thing seems exhausting. Not aspirational, exhausting. You think, I don't want to live in a way that requires constant documentation and curation. What you're experiencing is conspicuous consumption scaled to a level nobody imagined. Social media created 24/7 status broadcasting. Research shows direct correlation between social media use and decreased well-being, partially because constant exposure to curated wealth creates artificial inadequacy. You're opting out not because you can't compete, because you see the game clearly now. You understand that playing requires sacrificing privacy, authenticity, and presence for an audience of strangers whose approval means nothing. This creates adults who are immune to fear of missing out in ways previous generations couldn't be. They see luxury marketing and recognize it as performance. They see wealth signaling and feel pity, not envy. When colleagues talk about expensive purchases, they see insecurity, not success. They've realized that the wealthy people who seem most content are the ones nobody knows are wealthy, the ones not performing. They've learned that true financial security whispers, while financial insecurity shouts. So they've stopped shouting. They've stopped performing. They've opted out of a competition that never had a finish line. But philosophical understanding alone doesn't create this psychology. Sometimes it required witnessing catastrophic failure. Let's talk about 2008. Or maybe it was a personal crisis in your family. But somewhere, you watched this happen. You know someone who had everything: stable career, investments, property, the whole portfolio of financial success. Then something broke. The economy crashed. The company failed. The industry collapsed. And almost overnight, the security they'd spent 20 years building evaporated. You watched them spiral. Not just financially, psychologically, because their entire identity was wrapped up in their wealth. Their self-worth was calculated in net worth. Their social standing was built on their financial standing. When the money disappeared, they didn't know who they were anymore. You watched them become unmoored, desperate, sometimes destroyed. And here's what struck you most. They had skills, relationships, and resilience, but they couldn't access any of it. They'd built their entire foundation on the one thing that could be taken away instantly. And when it was gone, there was nothing underneath. Psychologists call this contingent self-worth, basing your identity on external, unstable variables. Research shows that people whose self-esteem depends on financial success experience higher anxiety, worse health outcomes, and more catastrophic responses to setbacks. You learn something crucial about security. The wealthiest person in the room is often the most vulnerable because they have the most to lose. Meanwhile, someone whose security comes from skills, relationships, adaptability, and self-sufficiency can survive almost anything. Money can be taken, but capabilities can't be. This created adults who build different foundations. They invest in skills that transfer across industries. They maintain relationships regardless of financial utility. They keep their identity separate from their income. They practice living below their means, not from scarcity mindset, but from understanding that flexibility is security. When opportunities arise that would pay more but leave them overextended, overspecialized, or dependent on continued growth, they decline. They've seen what happens when the music stops, and you've built everything on borrowed confidence. They'd rather have less and be stable than have more and be fragile. But this psychology wasn't just about avoiding catastrophe. Sometimes it came from experiencing the opposite, discovering what real freedom feels like. Now picture a specific period in your life. Maybe your early 20s. Maybe later. You have a job that pays enough. Not a lot, but enough. Your rent is covered. Your bills are paid. You've got some savings. Nothing extravagant. But you're not stressed about money on a daily basis. And here's what you notice. You have time. You can take a long lunch. You can leave work at 5. Your weekends are yours. You can call in sick without political calculation. You can take a week off without checking email. You have a friend making twice your salary at a prestigious company. She works 70-hour weeks. She can't take vacation without remaining available. She's exhausted. She's stressed. She's climbing, always climbing. And one day it hits you. You're freer than she is. You have less money and more life. She has more money and less freedom. And given the choice between her situation and yours, you'd choose yours every single time. What you've discovered is what economists call the golden handcuffs paradox. Higher income often correlates with less autonomy. You need the money to maintain the lifestyle, so you can't risk the job, so you accept conditions you wouldn't otherwise tolerate. Meanwhile, research confirms, beyond basic security, more money doesn't buy more happiness, but it does buy more stress, responsibility, and complexity. You've found the sweet spot. Enough money for security, enough freedom for satisfaction. And you've learned that moving up might mean moving backward in what actually matters. This creates adults who think carefully before accepting promotions. They calculate the true cost, not just in hours, but in autonomy, stress, and complexity. They turn down prestigious opportunities that would require sacrificing their time. They stay in roles others consider beneath them because those roles give them life outside work. They're not lacking ambition. They've redefined success. They've realized that the ability to control your time is the highest form of wealth, and they've decided they're already rich in the currency that actually matters. Money can't buy time, but time can create a life worth living. All of this shaped a specific type of person, but the clearest expression of this psychology came in the moments when they had to choose. Let's end with a specific moment, the moment when you had to decide. You're sitting across from someone offering you a job, or maybe a promotion. The money is significant, maybe double what you make now, maybe more. The title is impressive. The opportunity is real. Everyone in your life would call this a no-brainer. Your parents would be proud. Your friends would be envious. Society would call it success. And you're sitting there doing the math that nobody else does. You're calculating what you'd have to give up. The time, the flexibility, the work you care about, the balance you've built, the version of yourself you've become. You're realizing that saying yes would mean becoming someone else. Someone with more money and less peace. Someone who's won by society's scorecard, but lost by yours. And in that moment, you surprise everyone, maybe including yourself. You say no, not because you can't handle it, because you don't want it. What you're doing is choosing what's good enough rather than maximizing every variable. But you're taking it further. You're actively choosing less money because you understand what economists miss. Utility isn't one-dimensional. Research shows that people who prioritize financial success over intrinsic values report lower well-being and higher rates of anxiety and depression. You're not settling. You're optimizing for a different outcome. You've realized that maximizing income and maximizing life satisfaction are often opposing goals, and you've chosen your variable. This is the moment that defines this entire psychology. These are people who've opted out of the wealth competition, not from inability, but from clarity. They've done the math. They've seen the costs. They've experienced what actually matters. They're living proof that there are multiple scorecards, and the one society hands you isn't the only option. This isn't about romanticizing poverty or pretending money doesn't matter. Money solves real problems. Financial security is genuine security. These people aren't naive about that, but they've realized something most people never question. The amount of money needed for security is vastly different from the amount our culture tells us to pursue. They've found the line between enough and more, and they've decided to stop there. That's why they can watch their friends climb the ladder without feeling left behind. They're playing a different game with different rules. That's why they can walk past luxury without inadequacy. They've defined luxury differently. That's why they carry that peculiar combination of contentment and ambition. They're ambitious about things that matter to them, content with having enough of everything else. They're living proof that opting out of the wealth race isn't giving up. Sometimes it's waking up. In a culture that measures everything in dollars, they've kept an alternative scorecard. And maybe we'd all benefit from understanding that scorecard a little better. Not to adopt it necessarily, but to remember we have a choice about which game we're playing and what we're willing to pay to win it.